Okay, so chapter 4 is called autotrophy, and lots of times, if we over-abbreviate, we might just call this photosynthesis. But as you can see, there's going to be some other things in here besides photosynthesis. The main thing with autotrophs is they get their energy from what? Sun's one of them. They get their energy from non-living things, so inorganics. So methane gas, for example, is one. That's more rare. That's a type of chemoautotrophs. And then the ones you guys are most familiar with are your photoautotrophs for photosynthesis. But I want you to realize that there are some of these other. But the main thing with autotrophy is they're getting their energy from inorganics, right? They're not getting it from other living things. They're getting it from chemicals. Okay, so with photosynthesis, though, we're talking about anything that uses chlorophyll, and again does this photosynthesis, which are two main parts we'll talk about here. This could be bacteria, algae, and even some protista, and then some plants. So this is a type of getting energy that's in all the kingdoms except for animals and fungus. And the big deal here is they're using sunlight to convert carbon dioxide to sugars. So again, this is known as photoautotrophs. We depend on photosynthesis, obviously, for growing our food, but then also for our own fuel sources. For example, coal comes from decayed prehistoric plant life. Tar also. Oils come from prehistoric animal life. Okay, so photosynthesis. Obviously using the sun's rays here, and you guys should be a little familiar with the spectrum. So this is visible light. What is it? What's the little acronym? What is it? Roy G. Biv. Is that it? And I won't test you on that, but it's good for you guys to remember, right? When you go across the spectrum. Notice the wavelengths here. So, for example, red has the longest wavelength. Do you guys see that? And it goes from basically, crest to crest on these wavelengths. There's more energy in the shorter wavelengths, but actually the longer wavelengths can travel farther distances. So each type of color can be utilized in different ways. Hi there. Why are we not moving? Okay, so what's the deal with plants? And the scientists don't even really kind of understand it completely. I mean, they know how it works, but they're not sure what the deal is with plants not liking green. Now that sounds kind of backwards, but they're reflecting the green wavelengths. You guys with me on that? And they're absorbing the other ones and utilizing those. A scientist I remember once saying, the darker colors, like once we get all the colors together and it's black, are going to absorb so much energy that it's probably bad for the cells. It's going to get too hot. So I don't know if green's kind of an in-between. It's getting enough energy, reflecting the green away, and then not getting too hot. Now, besides chlorophyll, you have accessory pigments, and that's what's going on out there right now with fall, and it's getting almost complete. I think a lot of the leaves are falling now, but the reason the leaves turn color is because these accessory pigments are oil-based pigments. If you guys think of painting, the paints that we put outside of the house, are those oil-based or water-based? Oil, because they last longer, right? Oil bases last longer. The water's not going to be able to dissolve them as easily. The sun breaks them down too with time. I mean, it's a harsh environment out there. But chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are actually water-based pigments, like a watercolor, and they don't last as long. So when the plant decides, oh, we're done making the pigments, it's getting too cold, let's go dormant for the rest of the year here, for this winter season, the ones that are oil-based just stick around longer. Does that make some sense, you guys? So the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B easily break down. They're not being replaced, so we lose the green color. What's left behind? These other pigments that are oil-based, and they're reds and oranges and yellows. Now, they're there, and we don't see them in the other times of the year just because there's so much more chlorophyll. There's so much more of the green pigment that we're seeing. But these guys are helping too. These guys are collecting the wavelengths from the sun versus chlorophyll. They absorb, what they do absorb is different wavelengths compared to what they're being reflected. So it's making the plants more efficient and collecting different wavelengths. Okay, so this one I'm going to skip. A group of 4 is going to become an expert on the light reactions, and they're going to teach that to us. And then another group's going to check out the Kelvin cycle and teach that to us. Now, rate of photosynthesis, I'm going to handle here. And again, we're getting to a little bit of enrichment. There's not much to remember with this one. But rate, right, is, it says environmental effects on organisms are usually described in terms of how they affect the rate, or the activity per unit of time. So we're talking about photosynthesis here. How well is photosynthesis working? And I'll show you a couple graphs. So here, for example, the environmental factor we're testing is what? The amount of light, okay? So check it out. Photosynthesis increases as light increases. So it's a direct correlation. Now, there's a certain point. You guys see the saturation point? Well, it doesn't matter. It's getting as much light as it possibly can use. So increasing the light intensity does not increase photosynthesis anymore. Kind of reminds me if I'm shining a flashlight right in your eyes. It doesn't matter if I make it even more. It's already enough. Okay, now what do you think about temperature, you guys? How do you think temperature is going to affect photosynthesis? So a ball-shaped curve, right? As we start increasing in temperature, photosynthesis also is increasing. But there's a certain point where then when it gets too hot, right, photosynthesis starts decreasing. So there's an optimal temperature range. Okay, you guys, I know, are pretty darn aware of this. Photosynthesis is obviously very important to our world. Without it, there would not be any life. It supplies the oxygen for our atmosphere, which does change the amounts. This is a dynamic atmosphere, a dynamic Earth, so it continually changes. But right now, we have a good amount of oxygen in our atmosphere, and that's because of photosynthesis. Also, don't forget that most organisms, and including plants do photosynthesis and respiration, are releasing carbon dioxide and using oxygen. So whenever we change this balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen, I don't mean just we, whenever it changes the life on Earth. So since the 1800s, we have been watching a steady increase in carbon dioxide. And we can talk about this more later. I know it's pretty controversial, which is an interesting story on how it got controversial. But the fact is, since the 1800s, carbon dioxide is increasing. So then we need to kind of worry about this balance since, we've been living here, for a couple million years, basically, humans, I mean, and if it continues to change, it just affects the environment and the food we grow and everything. So we need, and furthermore, if it's because of us that it's increasing, we need to realize we could be hurting ourselves. Okay, on another level here we have these C4 and also called CAN pathways, and these are different than regular photosynthesis that we're going to learn about. Those are called C3s, and what these other organisms still exist today, and they are examples of plants that have lived in very oxygen-rich environments. So when the oxygen was even higher than it is now. And they still exist today, even though they have to struggle a little bit harder. Some of them are adapted to the desert. We'll talk a teeny bit about them when you guys do your reading. So the increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere favor the photosynthesis we have right now, which means we might lose those other guys even more. Okay, then moving on to respiration here. So all organisms do cellular respiration. And basically here, this is a synthesis reaction, and building these molecules, right, aids in growth and maintenance of cells. It also is a decomposition reaction when it's releasing energy or breaking down molecules to get energy. Now, cells do not use sugar for their work. You guys remember that. Cells do not use sugar. It's too big. It releases too much energy. You need to control how it's decomposed. And then there's this other cool molecule that exists called ATP. That is what the cell uses for work. This is like the perfect little molecule, holds the perfect amount of energy, so that does the work in the cells. And all of your groups, you're going to hear about ATPs. Okay, so there's oxidation is going on. It releases energy by oxidizing sugar. If you think about redox experiment equations, or let me see how I say it, reactions. Redox reactions versus reducing reactions versus oxidation reactions. So some of the energy is conserved in ATP, like I said, which powers the cell. Also, the raw materials for respiration are carbohydrates. We can break down fats and even proteins, but that's not ideal. We'd rather use our proteins for what they're made for. Cell respiration has to have oxygen or it won't work. So, two vocab words, aerobic is in the presence of oxygen. Anaerobic is reactions that happen when there's no oxygen available. There are some bacteria, for example, that don't like oxygen. They do anaerobic processes. So that is your reaction there. Come back to that. Okay, then these parts right here, I'm going to have a group talk about glycolysis, we'll have a group talk about Krebs cycle, and we'll have another group talk about electron transport system or chain. And again, we need enzymes for all these reactions. Okay, so I'm going to skip this one and this one. This is just the basics. And this is just kind of bringing them together. There's obviously a tight relationship between respiration and photosynthesis. All right, and that's it.